One time many years ago, I was driving and I got pulled over by the police. I think I had a tail light out or something. I'd only been driving for a few years at this point, so I was kind of a new driver. So usually when you get pulled over, you have to wait a second as they run your license plate number and whatever the hell else they do. I think half of it is just intimidation. But anyway, I decided to take that time to get my driver's license and my insurance card out in advance just to speed things up. I'd been pulled over a couple times before, so I knew that that's what they were gonna ask for. As the officer finally approached my car, he walked slowly along the side of my door with his hand on his gun. And when he got to my window, he told me to put my hands where he could see them. Now, at first I was like, what the hell is going on? But it very quickly hit me. He must have noticed me fiddling around with stuff in my car and he was being cautious, just in case I had tried to produce a weapon of some sort. So I put my hands on the wheel and the interaction proceeded as normal. I got a damn ticket. That sucked. I think the cop's reaction in this situation was reasonable. And in fact, most of you probably know that it's a good idea to avoid doing anything when you get pulled over until the cop tells you to, in large part because of uncertain situations like this one. Hi, I'm T1J.
Follow me.
So earlier I said I did what I did to speed things up, which is true. But another reason is because reaching for the glove box or my pocket in front of a cop is one of the most nerve-wracking things I've ever done. In my head, I'm like, I don't know what the officer is gonna think if I'm reaching too fast or if I'm reaching too slow or if he can't see my hands as much as he wants to. And many of you might be saying, well, there's no reason to be nervous in that situation. As long as you're doing what the officer wants you to do, you'll be fine. Well, that didn't work for Philando Castile. Now, I'm not gonna go too deep into this. You can research this if you want all of the details, and you should. But basically, Philando Castile was asked by Officer Geronimo Yanez to reach for his identification, just like a normal stop. But the officer was put on edge because Castile had informed him that he was carrying a firearm. So in spite of his intent to follow the officer's orders, Castile was shot and killed because he was believed to be reaching for his gun and not his wallet, even though he had been asked to reach for his wallet. Another thing you probably know is that it's a good idea to tell the officer if you're carrying a firearm. And in many states, you're legally required to. And I think this makes sense. Ideally, you don't want the officer to be surprised by the fact that you have a gun. In Castile's home state of Minnesota, you don't have to reveal that you're carrying a firearm unless they directly ask you. But from what I understand, police officers generally appreciate being informed in advance. So since it is very common for Americans to carry concealed weapons, and police officers presumably prefer to be informed about whether people are armed, a good police officer shouldn't be nervous or on edge when someone tells them they have a gun. You should be able to reach for your wallet without the officer thinking that you're reaching for your gun. Now, this all happened a year ago, but the reason we're talking about it now is that the officer who killed Philando Castile was recently acquitted by a jury of all charges. Now, let me tell you a secret. Sometimes it is unironically frightening to be a black man in America. But there are certain cases that really get to me and disturb me on a personal level. And the Philando Castile case is an example of that. Because every time a black person is abused or killed by the police, like clockwork, you can hear the apologists come running with justifications and excuses for the cops in question. He shouldn't have resisted. He should have been following orders. He shouldn't have run away. He should have obeyed the law. He should have stayed quiet. But the Philando Castile case proves that even if you do everything you're supposed to do, you still somehow run the risk of being killed. Juries are often put in precarious situations. They have to decide whether or not someone is guilty of a crime. And they have to do so not based on how they personally feel, but based on the evidence and the law. In fact, according to one of the jurors in this case, the main factor that led to the not guilty verdict was careful examination of the wording of Minnesota law. This particular juror did an interview, which I'll link below if you want to see it, in which he says he believes that Castile shouldn't have been shot and that he believes that Castile was probably reaching for his wallet and not his gun. But ultimately, I guess if a person, especially a cop, has a genuine fear for their life, that's enough to legally justify drawing your weapon and pulling the trigger. And you know what? I don't doubt that Officer Yanez feared for his life. If you watch the dash cam footage that was released after the trial, you can see that the officer is hysterical and disturbed by what just happened. I think sometimes people frame police brutality as just evil, villainous cops killing black people because it makes them happy. And maybe that happens to a small extent, but usually that's not what we're talking about. You see, why did Officer Yanez fear for his life? When Castile has broken no laws and complied with every order and followed every conventional wisdom about how to interact with the police, there should be no reason to fear for your life. I submit that if you're too nervous to deal with people just because they told you they are legally carrying a firearm, you shouldn't be a cop. But you know what? I have a theory as to why Officer Yanez feared for his life even when there was no reason to. There's plenty of statistical data that shows racial bias in police interactions and police brutality. And there's plenty of statistical data that shows that people in general are more intimidated by and untrusting towards black people, especially black men. And probably the vast majority of people who are black Americans, like myself, see and deal with these biases every day personally. The prosecutor in this trial argued that simply being afraid does not justify deadly force if that fear is irrational. But nonetheless, that fear was enough to convince a jury to come out with a not guilty verdict. And all I can say is, if fearing for your life in and of itself is enough to justify killing someone, even and especially if that fear is unreasonable and or informed by your implicit bias against black people, then black people are going to continue dying in America. And their killers are going to continue to walk free. That's just me though. What do you think? Thank you for watching my video. Be sure to subscribe to this channel for more discussions about social issues, current events, and pop culture. And if you like what I do, consider supporting me on Patreon. And remember, stay handsome.